The most lethal threat wears a familiar face. Not a rival, not a competitor, a friend. Power dynamics are not taught in boardrooms. They are felt, too late, in the aftermath of collapsed alliances. The individual studies external threats. Meanwhile, the internal circuit is already compromised. The breach came from inside the perimeter. This is not betrayal. Betrayal implies malice. This is architecture failure. The neuroscience is precise. Affection generates neural latency. The brain, flooded with oxytocin, suppresses threat detection. Proximity to someone trusted dulls the anterior insula, the organ of social danger. You do not see the signal. You feel warmth instead. The warmth is the blind spot. Dark intelligence begins where sentiment ends. The sovereign does not eliminate feeling. The sovereign categorizes it. Feeling is data. Misclassified data is a liability. Here's the mechanical truth. Friendship distorts hierarchy. It must. Two nodes cannot be both equal and stratified. The system resolves this contradiction. Silently, structurally. One node absorbs cost. One node extracts value. The sovereign who believes in symmetry will always be the absorber. The paradox is not that trust fails. The paradox is that trust was never the variable. Utility was always the variable. Trust was the sedative administered to obscure it. Cold steel does not rust from betrayal, it rusts from exposure, leaving the blade in sentiment too long. The sovereign retrieves the blade, cleans it, reclassifies the relationship. Not with anger, with precision. The map is already drawn. You were simply reading the wrong legend. Every social system has latency. Latency is the delay between signal and response. In machines, latency is measured in milliseconds. In humans, it is measured in missed opportunities and absorbed damage. The sovereign measures it in both. Friendship generates maximum latency. Here is the mechanism. Affection creates interpretive bias. When a trusted node sends an ambiguous signal, the brain defaults to benign interpretation. It fills the vacuum with history, with shared meals, with laughter at a particular table. The signal arrives distorted. The response arrives late. The damage is already structural. This is not weakness. It is biology operating as designed. The flaw is not the design. The flaw is trusting the design in a strategic context. Now observe the enemy. The adversary generates zero latency. The sovereign reads an opponent with cold clarity. Every movement is parsed. Every silence is weighted. No oxytocin clouds the anterior insula. The threat detection circuit runs clean, unobstructed, precise as glass. The enemy, paradoxically, makes the sovereign sharper. The friend makes the sovereign comfortable. Comfort is a system latency measured in bone. Analyze the boardroom, any boardroom. The individual who is universally liked is universally managed. Warmth is the mechanism used to hold them stationary. The smiles are real. The containment is also real. Both operate simultaneously. Only one serves the sovereign's interest. Social warmth is friction dressed as silk. The handshake that lingers too long, the compliment delivered in front of witnesses, the inclusion that positions, not elevates. These are mechanical responses, predictable, cataloged, neutralized, once seen. See the mechanism, name it without sentiment. The diagnosis is not cruel. It is complete. Machiavelli was not cynical. He was a diagnostician. The Prince is not a manual for cruelty. It is a field guide to system mechanics. Remove the moral overlay. What remains is pure architecture. The sovereign reads Machiavelli the way a surgeon reads anatomy. Not with admiration, with utility. The first calibration tool. The loved versus the feared. Machiavelli's observation is mechanical, not moral. Love is contingent. It depends on the receiver's internal state. Fear is structural. It depends on consequence. The sovereign does not manufacture fear. The sovereign manufactures consequence architecture. Every relationship has a cost-benefit topology. Make the cost of betrayal exceed the benefit. The equation stabilizes itself. Sentiment does not stabilize equations. Structure does. The second calibration tool, Jung's shadow. The individual projects virtue onto trusted allies. This is the shadow mechanism in reverse. The darkness is not seen in the friend. It is deposited there by the observer's own need for safety. The sovereign retrieves the projection, examines it coldly. The friend is neither villain nor saint. The friend is a node with competing interests. Label it correctly. Shadow work is not therapy. It is intelligence hygiene. The third calibration tool, Marcus Aurelius on expectation. You have power over your mind, not outside events. The Stoic calibration strips the variable of hope from the equation. The sovereign does not hope allies will remain loyal. The sovereign engineers conditions where defection is irrational. Hope is a gap in the architecture. Fill the gap with structure. Stone, not sentiment. Marble, not memory. These three architects did not build philosophies. They built hidden maps. The sovereign does not follow the map. The sovereign becomes the cartographer. The room is marble and low light. A gala. 47 people, 3 power centers. The sovereign enters and does not scan for enemies. The sovereign scans for dependency architecture. Who needs whom? Who owes whom? Where the invisible debt lines run. This is the board. These are the pieces. Across the room, Daniel, 15 years of friendship. Golf on Sundays. The man who gave the toast at the sovereign's second company launch. Daniel is now positioned beside the evening's primary capital node, a private equity figure who controls 3 exits in the sovereign's sector. Daniel did not mention the introduction. Note the omission. File it. Assign no emotion to it. Daniel's move was not malice. It was resource optimization. He positioned himself at the highest value node in the room. The friendship did not prevent the move. The friendship was simply not the relevant variable tonight. The neural latency trap. Expecting friendship to override incentive. It never does. The architecture forbids it. The sovereign does not cross the room toward Daniel. The sovereign moves toward the capital node's second circle, the advisor, the quiet man in charcoal who has not smiled once. He is the friction point. The gatekeeper with no title on the invitation. The sovereign engages him. Precisely. 2 minutes. 1 relevant observation about sector consolidation. 0 personal disclosure. The advisor's posture opens 3 degrees. That is the only signal required. Daniel notices the exchange from across the marble floor. Now Daniel moves. The sovereign has become the higher value node, not through warmth, through strategic gravity. Daniel arrives with an introduction, the one withheld 20 minutes prior. The sovereign receives it without acknowledgement of the delay. No punishment, no reward. Pure mechanical neutrality. The friend is now the vector, not the destination. Chess does not mourn the pawn's position. It simply calculates the next move. The mountain does not defend itself. It simply exists. The wind breaks against it. The storm reorganizes around it. The mountain does not negotiate with weather. It does not extend warmth to the avalanche. It does not mourn the erosion. It remains. This is not coldness. This is ontological stability. The sovereign who has absorbed the previous forescenes now faces a transition, not a tactic, not a maneuver, a state of being. The reliability paradox resolves here, not in the boardroom, not at the gala. Inside the architecture of the self, the external theater is merely the echo of the internal structure. Fix the structure. The theater recalibrates automatically. The sovereign does not perform sovereignty. The sovereign is the gravitational field. Examine the transition mechanism. Stage 1. The individual operates from emotional loyalty. Relationships are felt. Betrayal produces shock. Shock produces paralysis. The system fails at the moment of maximum stress. Stage 2. The individual begins cataloging. Starts to see nodes. Starts to measure latency. still feels the friction of the transition. The cold steel is new in the hand. Unfamiliar weight. Stage 3. The sovereign. No performance. No vigilance theater. The map is internalized. Reading the room is no longer effort. It is respiration. Breathing requires no concentration. Neither does clarity. The vacuum left by extracted sentiment is not emptiness. It is capacity. Space once occupied by hope, by expectation, by the weight of misclassified loyalty. That space becomes operational. The sovereign fills it with precision, with structured dependency, with relationships that function because the mechanics are sound, not because the feeling is warm. Warm is weather. Weather is temporary. Stone endures. Marble endures. The sovereign does not arrive at this state through discipline alone, through recognition. The map was always there, beneath the sentiment, beneath the neural latency, beneath the oxytocin fog of 15 years of Sunday golf. The map waited. It always waits. It does not chase. It does not plead. It simply remains cold, complete, and perfectly drawn. For the moment, the individual is ready to see. Loyalty is a feeling. Feelings have half-lives. The sovereign does not build on half-lives. The sovereign builds on mechanics. Mechanics do not expire. They do not fluctuate with market conditions, personal crisis, or shifting allegiance. A gear does not betray the machine. It either functions or it does not. The distinction is diagnostic, not moral. This is the core of the reliability paradox. Emotional loyalty is the most volatile asset class in existence. Consider the topology. The individual invests years, deposits trust, accumulates relational capital. The ledger appears solid. Then, a single variable shifts. A promotion, a scarcity event, a new alliance more proximate to power. And the ledger resets, not from malice, from incentive realignment. The friend did not change. The incentive structure changed. The friend followed it. This is not betrayal. This is Newton's first law applied to human behavior. Objects follow the path of least resistance. Allies follow the path of maximum incentive. The sovereign who understands this is never surprised. Surprise is a gap in the model. Eliminate the gap. Now observe mechanical dependency. It operates on a different substrate entirely. The enemy, the strategic adversary, requires no emotional maintenance, no anniversary of the alliance, no periodic reassurance. The adversary's motivation is transparent. Utility, mutual leverage, overlapping interest in a specific outcome. The adversary will not defect while the utility holds. This is structural loyalty, not felt, engineered. The sovereign engineers it deliberately, identifies the adversary's core dependency, positions as the irreplaceable node in that dependency chain. The relationship now has tensile strength independent of feeling. Cold steel under pressure does not fracture. Sentiment under pressure becomes glass. The protocol is precise. Step 1, audit existing relationships, not emotionally, mechanically. Map the actual incentive structure beneath each alliance. What does this node need? What do they fear losing? Where is the sovereign positioned in that calculus? Step 2, reclassify, not with cruelty, with accuracy. Some nodes remain proximate. Their incentive structure genuinely aligns. Others are repositioned, held at the correct strategic distance, close enough for utility, far enough for clarity. Step 3, engineer dependency, not manipulation. Architecture. Become indispensable at the structural level, the node that controls a critical resource. The voice that opens the door no one else can open. The sovereign does not beg for loyalty. The sovereign makes defection irrational. The paradox completes itself here. The enemy, managed with mechanical precision, becomes more reliable than the friend managed with emotional latitude. Not because the enemy is noble, because the structure is sound. Friendship built on feeling is a bridge of wood. Dependency built on mechanics is a bridge of bone. One weathers the storm, One becomes the storm's first casualty. The sovereign chooses bone. Always bone. The adversary is the cleanest data source available. No distortion, no affective noise, no oxytocin interference clouding the signal. The adversary observes the sovereign with predatory precision, catalogs every gap, every inconsistency, every structural weakness invisible to those administering warmth. The enemy sees clearly because the enemy needs to see clearly. Use that. This is not metaphor. This is operational intelligence. The friend tells the sovereign what is comfortable to hear. Comfort preserves the relationship. Preservation is the friend's primary incentive. Truth is secondary. The feedback loop is corrupted at the source. The sovereign who relies on friendly counsel is operating on contaminated data. The adversary has no such incentive. The adversary delivers the unfiltered diagnostic. Not from generosity, from competitive necessity. They probe the weakness because exploiting it serves them. The sovereign intercepts the probe, reads the vector, identifies the gap the adversary found, then closes it. The adversary just performed free intelligence work. Machiavelli understood this architecture completely. Keep your friends close. The axiom is incomplete, as commonly cited. The full mechanical truth? Keep your friends close enough to manage. Keep your enemies close enough to read. The enemy's movement is the most honest signal in the system. It is unfiltered by affection, undistorted by the need to preserve your comfort. Shadow intelligence. Bone-level clarity. The sovereign maintains adversarial relationships with surgical deliberateness, not from aggression, from information architecture. Every adversary is a mirror held at the correct angle. The reflection is unflattering. The reflection is accurate. Flattery is noise. Accuracy is signal. Now observe the conversion protocol. The adversary becomes a strategic asset through a precise sequence. First, the sovereign identifies the adversary's primary vulnerability, not to exploit, to understand the leverage topology. What the adversary fears losing reveals what they value most. What they value most reveals their incentive core. Second, the sovereign positions at the intersection of the adversary's need and the sovereign's capability, not with warmth, with demonstrated utility. One moment where the sovereign solves what the adversary cannot solve alone. The dynamic shifts in that moment, not to friendship, never to friendship, to structured mutual dependency. The adversary now has skin in the sovereign's success. The adversary's self-interest and the sovereign's trajectory are mechanically linked. The former enemy is now the most reliable node in the network, because the mechanic is sound, because defection now costs them. This is the full inversion of conventional social logic. Conventional logic: cultivate friends, neutralize enemies. Sovereign logic: cultivate dependency, convert adversaries into load-bearing nodes. The difference is not philosophical. It is structural. One system collapses under stress. The other strengthens under stress. Pressure reveals the integrity of the architecture. Wood splinters. Marble holds. The sovereign builds in marble. The vacuum where naive trust once lived is not loss. It is cleared ground. On cleared ground, the sovereign builds without sentiment contaminating the foundation. Every node placed deliberately. Every relationship load-tested before weight is applied. The structure that emerges does not require maintenance through feeling. It requires only that the mechanics remain sound. Sound mechanics do not sleep, do not defect at the moment of maximum pressure. They simply hold. The brain is not the enemy. The unexamined brain is. Every cognitive bias is a system default. Defaults exist for efficiency. In low-stakes environments, defaults preserve energy. In high-stakes environments, defaults produce casualties. The sovereign does not eliminate the default. The sovereign overrides it deliberately at the moment of strategic contact. This is not discipline. This is neural architecture management. Examine the primary defaults operating against the sovereign. Default 1. Proximity bias. The brain assigns credibility based on physical and emotional closeness. The node seen daily is trusted more than the node seen quarterly, not because the daily node is more reliable, because the brain is an efficiency machine. Familiarity reduces processing load. The sovereign flags this. Credibility is not proximity. Credibility is demonstrated structural alignment. Proximity is geography. Geography is not loyalty. Default 2. Consistency bias. The brain resists reclassifying established nodes. Daniel has been categorized as ally for 15 years. Reclassifying Daniel as neutral node with competing incentives requires the brain to discard 15 years of confirmatory data. The system resists, produces discomfort, labels the reclassification as coldness. As in gratitude, the discomfort is not moral signal. It is system resistance to update. Update anyway. The operating system that refuses patches becomes vulnerable. The sovereign patches without sentiment. Reclassification is not rejection. It is accuracy. Default 3. Loss aversion applied to relationships. The individual holds deteriorating alliances too long. The sunk cost of years invested produces paralysis. Releasing the alliance feels like loss. The brain prices the release higher than the actual strategic cost of retention. The sovereign calculates differently. The cost of retaining a compromised node is paid in continuous exposure. Every day, the misclassified ally remains proximate, the neural latency compounds. The threat detection circuit remains suppressed. The gap in the perimeter remains open. Release is not loss. Release is perimeter restoration. Now the recalibration protocol. The sovereign does not perform this analysis in the field. The field is the wrong environment for system maintenance. The sovereign creates a cold audit interval, scheduled, deliberate, removed from the emotional temperature of active relationships. In the cold audit, every primary node is assessed. Not felt, assessed. 3 diagnostic questions only. 1. What is this node's actual incentive structure right now? Not historically. Now. 2. Where is the sovereign positioned in this node's dependency calculus? Central or peripheral? 3. If this node's incentive structure shifted tomorrow, would the alliance hold mechanically or only sentimentally? Sentimental alliances hold under load. The audit reveals which is which. The recalibrated brain operates differently in the room. The gala, the boardroom, the negotiation table. The recalibrated sovereign enters, and the defaults are flagged before they fire. Proximity bias? Flagged. Consistency bias? Flagged. Loss aversion? Flagged. What remains after the flags are processed is clean signal. Clean signal produces precise response. Precise response produces strategic advantage. Strategic advantage compounds over time into something the room can feel but cannot name. Gravity. Presence. The particular stillness of a structure that cannot be moved. The wind arrives, reorganizes around the sovereign. The sovereign is already calculating the next move. The brain recalibrated is not a colder instrument. It is a sharper one. Sharpness is not the absence of depth. It is depth made precise. The sovereign feels. The sovereign simply refuses to let feeling file the wrong report. The report must be accurate. Everything depends on the accuracy of the report. Strategy without identity is theater. The individual who executes every tactic correctly but remains internally unresolved is performing. Performance is detectable. The room feels the gap between the move and the mover. Credibility erodes at the seam. The sovereign is not a role. The sovereign is a resolved architecture. Examine the distinction precisely. The tactician calculates from the outside in, reads the room, adjusts the mask, deploys the maneuver, returns home and removes the mask. The mask and the face remain two separate objects. The friction between them is constant, exhausting, ultimately unsustainable. The sovereign calculates from the inside out. The internal structure is already sound, already load tested. already stripped of the primary defaults. When the sovereign enters the room, there is no mask to maintain. The behavior is not performed, it is emitted. The way heat is emitted from stone that has absorbed the sun. Effortless, continuous, structural. Jung named this process individuation, not as philosophy, as mechanics. The integrated individual is not split between the social persona and the interior architecture. The two surfaces are flush, no gap, no friction, no energy lost in the maintenance of the performance. The sovereign does not spend energy on coherence. The sovereign is coherent. That coherence is the source of the gravity the room cannot name. Now examine what the resolved identity produces operationally. First, unreadability. The sovereign who is internally consistent produces no readable gap between intention and behavior. The adversary searches for the seam. The seam does not exist. The probe returns no exploitable data. The adversary recalibrates, assigns the sovereign a higher threat classification, increases caution, increases respect. Respect is not warmth. Respect is distance maintained by a node that has calculated the cost of proximity. That distance is strategic gold. Second, selective disclosure as architecture. The unresolved individual discloses to manage discomfort. Silence feels like exposure. The gap between interior and exterior produces pressure. But disclosure is perimeter breach. Every piece of personal data handed to a node is leverage that node now holds. The sovereign experiences no such pressure. The interior is stable. The silence is comfortable. The sovereign discloses deliberately. Each disclosure is a calculated move. What is shared? To whom? At what moment? With what strategic consequence? Silence is not absence. Silence is controlled information architecture. The room fills the silence with projection. The sovereign allows it. The projection is rarely accurate. Inaccurate intelligence held by adversaries is a structural advantage. Let them project. Let them be wrong. Third, emotional neutrality as signal. The room expects reaction. Reaction confirms that a node has been successfully pressured. Confirmation invites further pressure. The sovereign who does not react removes the confirmation signal. The pressure finds no purchase. The adversary receives no return on the investment. Neutrality is not suppression. Suppression is effort. Neutrality is the natural output of a resolved architecture. The mountain does not suppress the wind. The mountain simply has no mechanism for being moved by it. The sovereign identity is not constructed in the room. It is arrived at before the room. Through the cold audit, through the neural recalibration, through the deliberate extraction of sentiment from the analytical function, through the reclassification of every primary node with mechanical accuracy. By the time the sovereign enters the marble foyer, the work is complete. What the room encounters is not preparation. It encounters outcome. The outcome of a structure so internally sound that external friction produces no visible response. Only the faint, particular echo of something the room recognizes as authority. Not performed, not claimed, simply present. The way stone is present. The way shadow falls without effort across the floor. You have reached the terminal layer, not the end. The foundation. Everything above this point was architecture. This is the ground beneath the architecture. The bedrock, the place where the sovereign plants the first stone and does not move it again. This is where the briefing becomes a decision. Review what has been revealed. The friend generates neural latency. The latency is not personal, it is structural. The oxytocin circuit suppresses threat detection. The warmth is real. The blind spot is also real. Both exist simultaneously. Only one serves the sovereign. The enemy is the cleanest signal in the system, unfiltered, undistorted. The adversary sees the gap because the adversary needs the gap. The sovereign intercepts the probe, closes the gap, converts the adversary into a load-bearing node through structured mechanical dependency. Emotional loyalty has a half-life. Mechanical dependency does not expire. the brain defaults to proximity bias, to consistency bias, to loss aversion dressed as faithfulness. The sovereign audits the defaults, patches the system, operates on clean signal. The identity is not performed, it is resolved. Internal coherence produces external gravity. The room cannot name it. The room simply reorganizes around it. This is the reliability paradox. Completed. Now the decision. The briefing does not ask for belief. Belief is sentiment. The briefing asks for application. One relationship. Audit it now. Not emotionally, mechanically. 3 questions only. What is this node's actual incentive structure? Today, not historically. Where are you positioned in their dependency calculus? Central or peripheral? If their incentive structure shifted tomorrow, does the alliance hold mechanically or only sentimentally? The answer that arrives is not comfortable. Comfort is not the objective. Accuracy is the objective. The sovereign does not consume intelligence and return unchanged. Consumption without application is entertainment. The briefing is not entertainment. It is a surgical instrument. Surgical instruments exist to be used on the specific tissue at the precise moment, with deliberate intention. The individual who reads this and feels recognition, that recognition is the map activating. The hidden map was always present. Beneath the neural latency, beneath the sunk cost of misclassified alliances, beneath the warmth that felt like safety but functioned as sedative, the map waited, cold, complete, perfectly drawn. It is drawn still. One adversary. Audit them now. What do they need? What do they fear losing? Where does the sovereign's capability intersect their structural dependency? The intersection is the entry point. Not warmth, not aggression. Utility delivered with precision. One move. Deliberate. Timed correctly, the dynamic shifts. The former adversary now has skin in the sovereign's trajectory. The most reliable node in the network was never the oldest friend. It was always the correctly engineered dependency. The mountain does not announce itself. It does not publish its coordinates. It does not seek to be found. It simply exists, permanent, resolute, indifferent to weather, and those who need solid ground eventually arrive at its base. The sovereign does not chase alliance, does not perform credibility, does not administrate warmth to purchase loyalty that will not hold under load. The sovereign becomes the ground others need to stand on. That is not power pursued. That is power embodied. The wind arrives. The wind reorganizes. The mountain remains. The pact of clarity is not a contract with the briefing. It is a contract with accuracy, a commitment to audit without sentiment, to reclassify without cruelty, to engineer dependency without aggression, to enter every room as a resolved architecture rather than a performance in search of approval. The pact has one condition only. See the map, not feel it, not admire it. Use it. If you have absorbed the full architecture of the reliability paradox, if the 10 scenes have recalibrated the analytical function and you are ready to apply the protocol, then the pact is already sealed. Confirm it with 3 words. I see the map. The briefing is complete. The ground is cleared. The first stone is yours to place. Place it on bedrock, not sentiment. The architecture begins now.